Hi. So in regards to the Noahide laws, and the Torah and so on. This is the explanation. The Gemara in Masechet Chagiga, the tractate of Chagiga, says that Hashem wrote the Torah with black fire on white fire 974 generations before creating the world. And then he looked at the Torah and created the world based on it, meaning he saw that there are, let's say, for example, kosher laws, so therefore he created kosher animals. He saw that there is different aspects of the Torah, and therefore he created it based on it, meaning that the Torah is the blueprint of the world. And there are two ways of complying with the Torah. One way as a righteous Noahide, one way is a righteous Jew. Now, until Matan Torah, until the time of the giving of the Torah, the world was not obligated to follow it as a Jew because it wasn't formalized yet. Even though it existed and our avot, our patriarchs, knew the Torah, and even actually a more extended version of the Torah that we even have today, they did not follow the Torah per se like we do today because it wasn't formalized to the same extent. And it wasn't a law yet, meaning it existed, but it wasn't, the on button wasn't put on for all of mankind. So from the time of Adam HaRishon, the first human being that ever existed, Hashem already gave these laws. Now, the first formalization was for Adam HaRishon. He gave him 6 laws. And then to Noach, he gave him the 7th law, and therefore it's called the 7 Noahide laws instead of the 7 laws of Adam HaRishon, because the anything is called by the person that completes it. So the 7 Noahide laws were implemented officially at the time of Noach, after the Mabul, after the flood. Which means that Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov technically were considered Noahides, and they were not allowed to keep Shabbat the same way that we keep today, because the halacha is that a non-Jew that observes Shabbat it's death penalty, because it's considered as if they're stealing. So the sages explained to us that Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov kept Shabbat in a way because they knew the law and knew they were the fathers of Judaism that was going to come to the world. They kept it 99%, similar to how a convert keeps it, until the time they actually officially convert. Now, this all had to eventually get to the point of the climatic event of the world, which was Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, it became official to implement the second aspect of this Torah and separate the Jews from the rest of the world. Until then, everyone was obligated to follow the Noahide laws. Of course, most people did not. Most people were idolaters. But the righteous, the sons of Yaakov, followed the Noahide laws. But at the time of Mount Sinai, something drastic happened, which formalized the law and obligated the sons of Yaakov, Bnei Israel, into becoming Jews, which means they had to now elevate themselves to a higher level by complying with much more laws that they didn't have to comply with until now, meaning Shabbat, kosher, Taharat Mishpacha, which is family purity, and so on and so forth. So at that time, that at Parashat Yitro, the parasha called Yitro, which is the section of the Torah where we get the Torah, we got 3 things at Mount Sinai, and you see it in the verses where it says that Moshe Rabbeinu received the Luchot, the 10 Commandments, the Torah and the Mitzvot, meaning the written Torah and the oral Torah. So you got 3 things in Mount Sinai. You got the 10 Commandments, you got the written Torah, and which is what we have today, what we call the Chumash. And then we got also the oral law, because the oral law explains how to implement the written law. One cannot survive without the other. One depends on the other. There is no such thing as just the written law. There is no such thing as just the oral law. They go together. And usually the Christians and all the other heretics in the world, usually try to go against the oral law because that's the one that obligates the written law. But anyway, at that moment, we were called the chosen people. Hashem says that he chose us to comply with this higher law. So until that moment, no one was obligated to comply with the oral law as far as the aspect of it, of the mitzvot, kosher and things of that nature. And what ended up happening at Mount Sinai is that Hashem separated us from the rest of the nation, and he said, okay, you from now on have to comply with the entire Torah. The rest of mankind has to continue doing what they've been doing since the creation of mankind. Since the creation of mankind. And actually, one of the obligations that the Jews have as far as bringing light to the world is by them complying with the law, that will also influence the Gentiles around the world to also comply with the law. And vice versa, part of the job of the Gentiles in the world is to help and influence the Jews to comply with the law as well, with their part of the law. Now, so this is in essence the culmination of events. Now, if you fast forward from that moment until Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that you mentioned, Rabbi Yehuda, the Nasi means prince. He was the head of Israel. What changed from that moment to then is that at Mount Sinai, we got a written law and oral law. Oral law meaning that we were transferring it from generation to generation, from father to son, from rabbi to student, and so on and so forth. We weren't allowed to write all of the details. We're all, at that time, we had the wisdom and the ability to remember all of it. But since there was the downshift of humanity, specifically within Am Yisrael as well, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi saw that we weren't able to remember it in the details that we were able to remember it in the past, and therefore he implemented the power instilled in him and the sages by Hashem in the written law, in the Torah, which is to put a fence around the fence and also to protect the Torah. And he actually wrote down parts of the oral law. He didn't write all of the oral law down because that would literally consume every single piece of paper that ever existed from the beginning of mankind to the end of mankind. But he wrote the foundation. He wrote the foundation that explains how to fulfill this written law, how to fulfill this Torah. So he didn't change anything. He didn't add anything. What he did is that he wrote the foundation of it, which is called the Mishnah. Okay, and from there, several generations later, the sages saw that again, the new generation is deteriorating even further and is not able to understand completely the Mishnah, this oral law, because the Mishnah was written in a very, very simplistic, in a very, very minimalized way, the least amount of words, but they had the wisdom at that time to understand the 50 million, roots that go from it. At that point, they started seeing that some people are not able to understand it, so they elaborated it by writing the Gemara. The Gemara is what explains what the Mishnah is actually saying, but also how they got to it and how all of the other opinions that you would think by rationalizing it are wrong. So it's not just about telling you what to do, but how to understand what to do, even in order to implement this same law in other ways that are applicable. And that's the Gemara. Later on, they fast forward some more generations, and we get to the time of the Rambam. The Rambam, which is about 900 years ago, somewhere around 600-700 years after the Gemara was put together, the Rambam saw that many people are not able to comprehend a Gemara to the extent of actually knowing what to do. They can read it, but they don't know, okay, what's the bottom line? So he simplified it, and he took out all of the mitzvot, the yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, across the entire Torah, which actually also includes the NOAHIDE laws and everything else. Gemara includes NOAHIDE laws, the Mishnah includes everything, always included the whole Torah, both for the Jews and for the non-Jews. And the Rambam just took out the yes, no's. Yes, do this, don't do this. Yes, do this, don't do this. And what's called the Mishneh Torah or Yad Chazakah, or the Rambam. It's called three names, called after his name, Rambam. And he pretty much simplified it. fast forward again, without removing anything, but just simplifying it to accommodate the generation that we have. Then you fast forward it again another 400 years, about 500 years ago. Rabbi Yosef Karo took it and narrowed it down even further. Again, not removing anything, but by simplifying it even further and also applying it to the times. And he made something called Shulchan Aruch. There's also another sage called the Rama that also did it. So there's Shulchan Aruch was one aspect. The Rama added commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. But point being is that we have our tradition from today, from the rabbis you have today, all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. We know exactly every single person that, taught the Torah, delivered it to the next generation, what he said, what he didn't say, where did he get it from, what is it all based off. And when you learn the Gemara or the Mishnah or any of the commentary in the Midrashim, you're always going to find that there has to be a verse from the written Torah that it's based off of, or from the oral tradition called Moshe Sinai, meaning that Moses got it from Mount Sinai. But in general, the overwhelming majority of things have to have a verse in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, not in the prophets, not in the writings, but in the 5 books of Moses. We don't make halacha based on the Psalms or Proverbs. We learn things from there, but we don't make the laws from there. The laws are only from the 5 books of Moses, and the 5 books of Moses alone. And here we see that every time they mention something, yes or no, to do something, then they have to get that from understanding from somewhere, that teaching from somewhere. Where is the actual original source? And they provide the source and explain exactly how they got to it, and so on and so forth. So again, the Noahides, in essence, their job in the world hasn't changed at all from the beginning of mankind. Nothing has changed for them. The only thing that I would say has increased their ability to increase merit is that there's a much greater need for them to influence Am Yisrael to fulfill the Torah today than there ever was before, which is a extraordinary job to do, because that can give the Noahide the status of being a giant in Olam Haba. Some examples of it, for example, that are in the Torah. Again, we have to always have a source. One example of it is Job. Job was a Noahide. He was a Noahide, and he was also a prophet. He spoke to Hashem. But yet, he's one of the foundational teachers that we have in our Tanakh, even though he was a Noahide. He was a righteous Noahide. Now, this responsibility that the Noahides have, which is a twofold responsibility. One is to comply with the law, and the second aspect of it is to influence Am Yisrael to comply with the law, is an enormous responsibility that if they fulfill, they have a share of the world to come that is as extraordinary as it gets. The problem today is that people are constantly forcing themselves to compare everything to what they know. So they know, let's say, for example, Christianity or a little Judaism or a little bit of a few different things. And what ends up happening is that they try to reinvent the wheel, if you will. By that I mean reinventing the wheel by they're trying to make the, certain procedures or certain ways to show their beliefs in an exterior way. They start to create customs, and they add to what was actually the responsibility, what's written in the Torah. And that is problematic. And the reason why is because if you're just adding something simplistic, like for example, you decide that you want to get together with your family every week, 7 days a week, once a week, 3 times a week, doesn't make a difference. To learn the Torah and to learn your obligations, there's no problem with it. But if you decide that, no, we're going to decide that from now on, every June 1st, we're going to celebrate the NOAHIDE day or something like that. That's a serious problem. Why? Because that, according to the Rambam, which means according to the Gemara, which means according to the Mishnah, which means according to our written and oral Torah, that means that you are adding and therefore changing the Torah, which means that the person is now creating a new religion. Why? Because the religion itself, is Judaism, is the aspect of the Jews, and Noahide is the status for the rest of the Gentiles. By taking parts of the Torah and then adding to them, adding a holiday, adding certain things that's not written in there, they're now creating a new religion, because it's not the same thing. There's something added. Once it's added, it's a completely different thing. It's like saying, oh wait, no, it's only just a little small addition. No, it's not a small addition. It's like, for example, if a person makes a juice, he decides to make a juice, a bunch of oranges, and he makes a nice orange juice, and then his friend says, yeah, no, this is good orange juice, but let's put a little bit of rum in there. Let's put a little bit of rum in there. It's still orange juice. No, my friend, it's not orange juice. It's now an alcoholic beverage. It's now an alcoholic beverage that tastes like orange juice, but it's not orange juice. It's an alcoholic beverage. So once a person starts adding things that are not part of the Noahide laws, they're creating a new religion, which is a horrible, horrible sin. So that's a very serious problem with many of the people that are simply guiding themselves and not in accordance to the Torah, because they want to, in essence, live like a Jewish life with the ceremonies and things of that nature, but don't necessarily want or can't, or whatever the case may be, actually formally convert and keep everything. And that is a very serious problem, because now they're taking the Torah that they're obligated to follow all the way from the time of Adam HaRishon, and they're now distorting it, playing with it, manipulating it, adding things that their own opinion. Now, the Rambam, which all of the religions, all of the people that know who he is, know he's one of the greatest human beings that ever lived, said the following. He said that a righteous Noahide, or Noahide, that follows the laws of Noah, follows the laws in the Torah according to as far as the Gentile laws, if he follows the Noahide laws because it makes sense to him, not because God said it, not because it's written, not because it's an obligation, but rather because it makes sense to him not to kill, it makes sense to him not to eat an animal while it's still alive, it makes sense to him not to worship a statue or a man, it makes sense to him not to commit adultery, it makes sense to him to not do all those things and comply. The Rambam specifically says not only does he not get a share of the world to come, but he's actually considered one of the biggest fools in the world. He's considered, in his language, one of the fools of the nations, not one of the wise of the nations or the righteous of the nations. Why? Because he's doing all the work, but he's not going to get a single reward for it. Why? Because the reason why you have to follow the Torah, whether Jew or Gentile, is simply because God said so. Not because you like it, not because you don't like it, not because you agree with it or disagree with it, but simply because God said so. That's the reason to do all of it. So when a person follows the law based on God said so, he's considered special. He's considered wise. He's considered amazing. Why? Because once the same Rambam says, if the Noahide follows the laws of Noah because God said it, not only is he considered one of the righteous and wise among the nations, but also he has a share of the world to come, which is written in the prophets. You'll see that at the end of days, 10 out of every one of the 70 nations will come to the Jews that are righteous Jews, that have done tshuva, that are righteous and follow the Torah, and 10 from each nation will come and ask them, our forefathers have lied to us, and please, teach us. And every Jew that wears a tzitzit will have 2,800 righteous Noahides to teach as the students, because they earn their spot. Why do they earn their spot? By, again, fulfilling their twofold obligation. One obligation is to fulfill the Torah that's applicable to them, the Noahide laws, and two is that they're fulfilling the Torah as far as helping Jews fulfill their aspect of the Torah, because they're eventually going to become their teachers. They're the chosen that's supposed to be their teachers. So what are the Noahide laws? Noahide laws are not only 7. They're not only 7. This is also another confused thing. It's not only 7 things. There's somewhere around maybe 60 laws. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It's almost around 60 laws, but they're all generally moral laws that break off of the 7, similar to how the 10 Commandments breaks off into 613 commandments. You know, the 10 Commandments are not separate from the 613 laws. It's in essence the same thing. It's in essence the same thing, but it's, let's say, for example, there is the tree, and then there's all of the roots. Same thing with the 7 laws of Noah. 7 laws of Noah are all moral laws that every normal human being, if he thinks about it, would arrive at the same conclusion anyway. But it's a formalization of that law. You have to follow it because God said so. And therefore, a person that learns to be a righteous Noahide will spend an enormous amount of time learning both the written Torah, which is the Chumash, the Tanakh, with the commentary from the Jewish sages like Rashi, Rambam, Ramban, and so on. That part, and they will learn Musar. Why Musar? Because Musar is ethical laws that are applicable to all of mankind. Applicable to all of mankind. If a person truly wants to do the will of Hashem and learn, they'll learn this, and they'll realize that there's so many things that a person needs to fix when it comes to ethics, that there's no time for them to play around with the Torah and try to add some extra thing to it. Why? Because they're not even doing the minimum requirement as it is if they're not learning it. So the point is that there is a moral laws that both Jews and Gentiles need to comply with, that they have in common, and they're both taught in the teachings of Musar. So with that being said, this gives a lot of work to anyone that wants to be a righteous Noahide, because now they see that they don't need necessarily a special holiday to serve Hashem. They're obligated to do it every day. Every day is a holiday. They don't need a special food to serve Hashem. Every day the food is special. Every day. Why? Because every day they're supposed to eat food that meets certain requirements, meaning that it's not an animal that is still alive. It's there's ethics behind it. It's again, it's even the things that a person does. It's not just the way they talk. The way they behave needs to be ethical. So point being is that a person that wants to be a righteous Noahide or a righteous Jew has to review what is the ethics in accordance to the Torah, meaning in accordance with Hashem. And when a person does that, he has his work cut out for him. She has her work cut out for her, with a lot of work, with a lot of learning, and B'ezrat Hashem, a lot of success to follow. Hopefully this gives you a good understanding of what it means to be a righteous Noahide. Again, the amount of musar that a person needs to learn in their life. Just to give you a small, tiny example, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the one that wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he had a separate book called Magid Yesharim, where it was like, in essence, like a journal that he wrote about what happened, what was the conversations between him and his study buddy. Who was his study buddy? An angel. An angel would study with him. And one day he writes that the angel rebuked him harshly. Why? He says, how come you didn't study more Musar today? Not that he didn't study Musar. He studied a few hours of Musar every day. He said, how come you didn't study enough today? He rebuked him harshly. If Rabbi Yosef Karo, that was at such a high level to be able to have the merit to study with an angel, if he was rebuked for only studying a few hours of Musar for that day, Needless to say, your average Jew or your average Gentile that's trying to be a righteous Noahide, how much Musar do they need to listen to and learn and implement and so on? So the point being is that when a person really sees how much obligation they have based on the minimum requirement of a Jew or a Gentile, they simply will find themselves in a position where they do not have an interest or an inclination or even the time to add any of their own opinion or any of their own anything to it, because first you have to fulfill the obligation and then you go for the extras. First you have to pay the rent or the mortgage, then you start worrying about your savings account. You don't worry about a savings account until you pay the basic requirements to live. Even more so when it comes to Torah. First you fulfill the basic minimum of being a Jew, basic minimum of being a Gentile, a righteous Noahide. Then you worry about other things, and the reality is in our generation, alvai, we wish everybody just simply did the minimum. We wish that they just did the minimum, because the minimum requires people to connect to Hashem, to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu every day, all the time, in every way, every shape or form, whether they're a Jew or a Gentile. That's minimum. Minimum. Just if we do that already that puts us at a different level than most people in the world. So hopefully this gives everybody a rundown of what's the responsibility. Please feel free to ask any more questions, details, and so on. And again, thank you again for learning with me. Kol tuv, hatzlacha rabah.